Thanks, Peter. The tipping point for the new energy future is supply chains. A lot of people think it's the lowest levelized cost of electricity, but the fact is that solar modules, batteries, and fuel cells can be set up at small scale. They can be customized and nested, and this will help create demand. So we have a lot of existing baseline demand that will be served through very large scale plants and very large scale oil and gas production and refining facilities. But this capability to have flexible, nestable, customizable, and small scale solar energy storage devices and hydrogen fuel cells will enable demand growth and allow us to have electricity and power in general terms where we didn't have it before, where we didn't think we needed it, where we didn't think we knew it could go. And this will allow not only to serve the energy needs of the future, but to grow energy capacity and thereby increase demand as well. So to create a convenience factor and a lot of supply chain driven growth. So the change that we're going through is actually a huge kind of a conceptual tipping point. It's one that's sort of like the tipping point that led information theory to enable the internet and telecommunications. It's sort of like the transformation that allowed containerization to transform global shipping, which then transformed global trade. So in 1944, somebody named Claude Shannon invented something called information theory. And what he did was he showed how to break down little bits of information. He invented basically the 0-1 paradigm and showed how, and specifically quantitatively figured out how to transform information into bits and bytes. And this then became basically the backbone of modern telecommunications. It's a backbone of everything we use today, whether it's the cell phone, the phone, recording devices, etc. Similar transformation occurred in the container shipping industry, where I used to work for about 15 years. A guy named Malcolm McLean set up a shipping company around a principle that you could put stuff into containers and then put the containers onto trailers and drive them. It was called intermodal transport. But before about 1956, this didn't exist at all. So everything that was put onto a ship had to be loaded and unloaded by hand manually. This containerization cut down the cost of shipping by 97%, totally transformed the shipping industry. So today, the energy industry is at the cusp of this kind of turning point, and it is a supply chain turning point. So until today, oil and gas and electricity companies have been producing what they produce in massive centralized plants, whether it's an upstream oil and gas well, whether it's a production, or whether it's refinery, whether it's a coal-fired power plant, whatever it is, they've been producing in these location-dependent, high-scale kind of paradigms, and they've been then transferring that power from where it's generated over a massive distribution and transportation network to lots and lots of sites where individuals and businesses kind of draw on that. And so this has created a vast infrastructure of super tankers of oil to get gasoline to your car, train loads of coal shipping and bringing coal from Wyoming and basins, et cetera, to local and the metropolitan areas. But renewables are creating the ability to create distributed power and to transmit it or transport it in a customizable and small scale fashion. So this is true especially of solar, hydrogen fuel cells, and energy storage. That means that you don't need all that transportation and distribution infrastructure anymore. You don't need the super tankers. You don't need the transportation and transmission and distribution towers, really, to a large degree. So And what that means to end users is that um, there's going to be the ability to access that power in many different forms, multimodally, sort of like the container shipping example. The car, for example, could serve as a power node, which will then power the appliances in the home. And the appliances in the home are, the solar power might be embedded embedded in the sidewalk or in the clapboard, the siding of the houses, which will then create opportunities for power almost in any location that is needed. We're working with a company, my company, Boston Strategies International, is we're working with a client that makes solar gem technology. So instead of having big panels, you can actually have little tiny crystals that are basically embedded into almost anything. It's steel and concrete and whatever else now, and it will continue to get more and more advanced to the point where we'll be able to put solar power in almost anything, anywhere, and then have that hook into whatever kind of accessories or devices that are needing to use it. So, heating, air conditioning systems, appliances, and all that can be fueled by hydrogen fuel cells, which can be purchased as small containers, sort of like the way we purchase propane for a barbecue grill today. That might be simplifying a bit, but my point is that a lot of this large scale infrastructure, which was built around the concept that we needed to have enormous trillions of dollars of capital investment in order to actually have power locally, that will not be true in the future. And so some of the components, when we bring that down, say, well, how is supply chain going to make that happen? The components for that will be small. And the difference is that some of these modules, whether it's solar power, solar panels or tiles, or the solar gems that I mentioned, or the battery, the energy storage devices, they are made in a discrete manufacturing process, not a huge continuous process. So they can be produced at high scale, large scale, but they can be used in small scale. So small devices, pico solar they call it, is used to just power one device. For example, it's a tiny individual panel. Roof tiles, like Tesla has, or roof tiles, um, and has been trying to roll them out for about 5 years now. And a similar company in Europe is Blazing Trails. It's called Roofit. Very interesting, comparable model. And these are including some clients of ours that basically have these. They're changing the model. They're changing the game by manufacturing and distributing these products in a different format than they had previously been made, a format that enables them to be used at small scale for customized applications. This includes also wind. So for some wind power, until recently and even now, major efforts are underway to build these enormous wind farms. And we're very familiar with this because Boston Strategies helped Vattenfall and Scottish Power set up a 7.2 gigawatt wind farm off of the coast of the UK. But what's happening into the future is that some wind turbines are now being made at small scale for small use, whether it's, and some of it could even eventually be possibly portable. So it enables potential use of wind turbines for applications that were not really possible before, a residential use, for example, or like commercial use. These things, when the scale starts to move down, as we've seen happen in electronics, we've seen it happen with uh, pretty much all kinds of technologies, but especially computers, telecoms, mobile phones, everything. As these products, the wind, the solar, and the fuel cells start to go into nano mode, I'll call it, and downsize, then the applications that can use them increase, hugely. I would say exponentially, possibly, and so that will actually fuel demand. For example, if I go to the if solar thin solar receptors are embedded in my gym bag that I go to the gym with, and I carry my phone in my gym bag. Well, it can be charging while I walk to the gym. And if the siding on the house actually contains solar receptors, then we can be watching TV inside, powered by by the siding of the house, which already is there. So it's not really, doesn't require any special unique equipment, such as generators and transmission distribution networks of power, etc. Fuel cells might be part of this network, because in particular they could become one of the major, they could basically replace the engines in cars and trucks to some degree. So these engines would then become power sources, which would power all sorts of other things. So the energy companies that are powering, building these new customizable value chains, will gain access to all this incremental demand potential. And those, conversely, that sort of cling to the model of huge plants, large scale production operations that cost billions of dollars each, they will need to find ways to cut costs faster than those who are producing the innovative and customizable and nested and modular platforms and formats will be growing their market. So there will be a kind of a competition going on between large scale, high volume, cost reduction focused plants, and your nimble, agile, customizable, and innovative new formats for power distribution and generation. And so Alok Raj Gupta and I kind of pioneered the thinking in this area in our book, Reinventing the Energy Value Chain. And we developed basically like what's called a supply chain advantage framework, which shows the energy company how to exploit the flexibility, how to make their supply chains innovative, customizable, and modular, so that they can capture those trillions of dollars of additional shareholder value. And so this is basically kind of where we're headed with all this. And in the future, I foresee that solar plus energy storage will take a huge role in electricity grids. And I'm not the only one, of course. Many people have predicted this over time, but that it will also power a lot of light vehicles, bikes, motorcycles, single person cars. There is a company in Germany now that is actually called Sono Motors. Sono Motors is producing or developing the prototype of a solar car. So this is a car that's built with solar, embedded thin film solar fenders, hoods, etc. And so then once you have this, actually, no need to fuel it up. And so this is the kind of thing that solar plus energy storage could dominate eventually the small vehicle market and a lot of other small power needs. Whereas hydrogen plus fuel cells may prevail in heavy vehicles, because especially fleets of cars, trucks, and buses, where you have closed loops and recharging, refueling stations that can provide the power and torque that are necessary to drive those heavy vehicles. And we think that wind will face competition with both of those due to the unpredictability of wind power. It's called the intermittency problem. But that energy storage will increase in scale and size and duration to be able to handle some wind, especially for large scale utility use. But then eventually oil and gas will sort of face a lot of competition with these new formats. The difference will really be supply chain management. So that's my point, is that a lot of people look at this and they say, well, it all comes down to levelized cost of energy, which means basically how low can the cost go for each technology. But in our view of supply chain, and in my view of supply chain, which dates back to my first book called The Guide to Supply Chain Management, which was published by The Economist, I identify 4 strategies on how to generate value through supply chain management. I mean, shareholder value. One is rationalization, the other is synchronization. Those 2 are cost focused. And then the third one is customization, and the fourth one is innovation. Those are market growth driven. So what's been happening is that the fossil fuel industry is kind of now playing on the cost driven side of the equation. And I would say they're playing on half the ball field, because the companies that are able to change the format and go to a distributed market with the distributed format and customize and continually innovate the technology and the product format and the channels of distribution will be capturing the market growth potential that's on the other side of the ball field. While writing Reinventing the Energy Value Chain, Alok and I evaluated the impact of 14 widely used supply chain improvement techniques on net margin, gross margin, asset productivity, and revenue growth potential. And then we compared all the energy technologies on 5 dimensions of supply chain value generation potential. I know that sounds a little bit complex because there's a lot of numbers in there and different techniques, but let me summarize this in a few charts, because the supply chain advantage of renewables stares you in the face when you look at these charts. This chart here shows the supply chain value potential of one type of those energy production technologies: coal and gas-fired thermal power generation. This is a sort of what we call a spider diagram, or I call it the cobweb diagram, but it shows the extent to which supply chain management can generate shareholder value through rationalizing costs, which is the top center, and the right center. It would basically those show to the extent to which supply chain management techniques like inventory reduction, capital plant scheduling, and things like that can cut costs. And the bottom left measures the degree to which customization can add shareholder value. The bottom right, the degree to which innovation, like repetitive product innovation and new releases, can increase shareholder value through supply chain management. And the synchronization potential, the other axis, shows the degree to which plant scheduling and asset management can improve supply chain value generation. And so what this chart shows is basically that, in this case, coal and gas-fired thermal power can contribute to supply chain economic advantage and shareholder value, mostly through asset and cost reduction and management. So it's kind of the top of the diagram. It's showing that the benefits that can be reached by doing these controllable supply chain things are mostly cost related and asset related. Now, when you look at solar power as a contrast, the ability of solar power to generate shareholder value by reducing cost, which is the top half of the diagram, is larger, because there is more potential to increase synchronization across the supply chain with solar than there is for oil and gas, because of the non-location dependence of the format of the technology, and also the potential to reduce costs both in the capital project phase and also the operating and maintenance phase is greater with solar power, because of the ability to continue to reduce the costs on each dimension, compared to oil and gas, which is already kind of driven as low as it's going to get. Then the bottom part shows the other half of the picture, which is that in addition to these benefits, solar power has a huge ability to be customized to the individual application and has a huge ability to come out with innovative new products, new technologies. We've seen thin film come out. There are many, many different chemistries of solar panels. Most people don't go into it at that level of depth, but there are sort of like continuous new releases coming out that are almost like new versions of Windows or new versions of the iPhone. And we don't really think of it that way because all we see is a panel, but it's always an emerging technology with a rapidly changing substrate chemistries. And so the ability to improve supply chain potential and through replacement of units, looking at life cycle cost changes, optimizations, and things like that, through all that falls under supply chain management. That is much, much greater than it was in the chart we just looked at for coal and gas fired power generation. And then in addition to these, the solar power was just one chart, but similar patterns exist for fuel cells and energy storage. Then this last chart shows the what I call the supply chain value generation frontier. The middle of the chart, the blue line, shows kind of the core potential where we are today for fossil fuels, and it shows where renewables are as a whole. So comparing all the different fossil fuels, if you lump them into average them together, you have oil and gas, you have coal, you have anything that's kind of fossil fuel driven, and I think we may have thrown nuclear into this as well because nuclear isn't technically a renewable source, although many people kind of lump it into that category. Then you compare that against the outer diagram, which shows that renewables potential for supply chain value generation is almost at the outer extremes or the maximum amounts on every dimension. We're looking at into the future at the likelihood and continuing and ongoing cost reduction per unit and per kilowatt hour of every renewable technology that's out there today, and very, very steep rates of decline on some of the rapidly emerging technologies like energy storage and fuel cells. So this rapid cost decline combined with the flexible formats and ability to customize the technology to individual applications from small, like iPhone kind of scale, to large, meaning electric power generating plant, is all there. We're looking at solar being used at every potential level of scale, from concentrated solar plants being funded by the Gates Foundation and other types of major global projects, to pico solar being used in Papua New Guinea in remote areas and villages that don't have any kind of power generation source today. So the potential for solar is way out on the outer extremes on every dimension. And that's kind of, this chart kind of summarizes the supply chain advantage of renewables, at least some renewables, compared to traditional fossil fuel power, which is location dependent and asset intensive. So, well, there you go. This has been David Steven Jacoby with Boston Strategies International. Thanks for tuning in. If you're an energy producer or a technology or equipment provider who wants to have a clear understanding how to best apply these supply chain techniques, I definitely look forward to talking to you. Please reach out, and I look forward to your questions during the Q&A. Thank you.